I was in the middle of the interview when I suddenly realized something. I was going to be okay. It's not that the interview didn't matter or that I thought I was doing fabulously well. It was my meeting with the UUA's Ministerial Fellowship Committee to determine if I was ready to be a UU minister, so it was a very big deal. And I knew I hadn't answered all of their questions very well or even correctly. And who knows what red flags they might find in my evaluations or recommendations that my mentors and I hadn't caught. Still, halfway through this very big deal interview, I had a startling moment of clarity. That however it turned out, whether the MFC approved me to go into search or sent me back to address their concerns or anything else they might choose to do, I knew I would be okay. And realizing that changed everything. I was able to let go of my expectations, and I was able to enjoy myself. I could even, dare I say, have fun with the process. No longer thinking of me in front of a dozen stern-faced people as a grilling, but finding it more of an exploration of ministry and faith and what it means to be human together. Perhaps the reason my realization was so startling was that we have this idea that religion must be a totally serious business. And yes, it's certainly concerned with life and death and justice and other great matters. Religion is about the big questions we find ourselves asking. Why are we here? What is our purpose? How do we know what is right? Why is there suffering? What happens when we die? And it's certainly important to try to answer them for comfort, for encouragement, for guidance. But must the answering of those questions always be such a serious undertaking? This month's Soul Matters theme, our last theme of this church year, is play. Actually, play was supposed to be last June's theme, but well, you know, the pandemic happened. So it was changed to compassion instead. I guess the editors at Soul Matters thought that we needed to be more serious about what was happening, which I understand. But the thing is, being playful isn't the same as being frivolous or childish or shallow. Playfulness is not the opposite of compassion or resilience or hope, after all. And play, I would argue, was very important in helping us to get through the pandemic and the last administration with our sanity intact, mostly. 15 months ago, in my first sermon on Zoom, I offered my thoughts on what would help us get through this together. Don't forget to breathe, I said. Be patient with one another and with yourself. Take it one step at a time. Keep a routine. Limit your news intake. Find something you can control, and as psychologist Eileen Feliciano put it, control the heck out of it. Check in with one another. There was one more thing. Keep a Sabbath, I suggested. So many people, whether essential workers or others working at home, found themselves on 24/7. But that's not sustainable. We need time off. We need breaks from focus and effort for the sake of our own mental hygiene. It's not selfishness to know that we need time for ourselves, to relax and recuperate, to play. There's a loaded religious word for you, Sabbath. Even if we know that it simply means day of rest and comes from one of the creation stories in Genesis, well, in Exodus, it became a commandment. And then, complicating things as human beings are wont to do, we had to go and figure out ways to work at resting. There's a beautiful hymn in Singing the Living Tradition that we don't sing very often, perhaps because it feels like we should be singing it on a Friday evening rather than a Sunday morning. The words of this Sabbath hymn came from Gustav Gottheil, who was a longtime rabbi in New York and a leader in Reform Judaism. In the late 19th century, he published one of the first Jewish hymn books in the United States. The music for this hymn then came from composer and Jewish Choral Society conductor Abraham Binder, who worked on a later version of that hymn book. Let's sing their hymn now, Come, O Sabbath Day. Work and sorrow cast away. Sabbath is for prayer and play. One of the ways I play with religion is with words. I realized this during one of our sessions on sacred language and sacred translation that Rebecca Wheeler and I offered this spring. It was the session where, having talked about the words we like and the words we don't, and our own religious journeys, and how certain words show up and are meaningful for us, we were writing our personal credos, our individual statements of how we experience and understand the world. You'll hear more about our personal credos in 2 weeks' time, but it was when I was writing mine that I realized I wasn't just enjoying the program, I was playing with these sacred words. I was playing with religion too. And that got me thinking. There are lots of words, some more familiar to us, some less so in religion, that start with theo, from the Greek word meaning God. There's theology, literally meaning God talk, which has come to refer to the process of trying to understand religion and religious practices, whether that religion has a God or not. There's theocracy, meaning God rule, where a society is run according to one particular religion rather than on a civil basis. There's theodicy, or God judgment, which is trying to understand why there is evil. There's theophany, God showing, meaning a manifestation of divinity. And there's even theomachy, God battle, meaning war between or against the gods. But nowhere that I have been able to find is there a theo word that means playing with God. If it did exist, I think it would be theopasy, but I can't find that word used anywhere either. But it's not surprising that theopasy doesn't exist, because if religion is a serious business, well, God must be the most serious part of it. And that's all we've ever been told. As Episcopalian minister Debbie Thomas put it, growing up, I never heard a word about God laughing, joking, or doing anything for fun. No one invited me to imagine the Jesus of the gospel smiling, much less goofing around with his disciples, playing hide and seek with the children who flocked to him, or basking in the sunshine on a gorgeous summer day. The list of characteristics I associated with God, Thomas writes, omniscience, holiness, transcendence, righteousness, did not include playfulness. And so, when Thomas was reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to her children, the book written by Christian apologist C.S. Lewis, in which, spoilers, the Christ-like Aslan the lion is killed and then resurrected, Thomas was astonished to read that Aslan takes time after coming back to life, but before defeating the White Witch, to play a game of tag with Lucy and Susan. "Oh, children," said the lion, "I can feel the strength coming back to me. Oh, children, catch me if you can." A mad chase began. Round and round the hilltop he led them, now hopelessly out of their reach, now letting them almost catch his tail, and now stopping unexpectedly so that all three of them rolled over together in a happy, laughing heap of fur and arms and legs. It was such a romp as no one has ever had, except in Narnia. When she first read this, Thomas explains, she cried. The possibility that God might laugh, romp and play with his children stopped me in my tracks. How could such a scandalous thing be true? However we understand words like sacred, holy, and divine, whatever we think other people mean when they use a word like God, the fact is that we're trying to use these words to talk about ideas and feelings that are so big that the only thing we can really do is play with the words. Because as soon as we get too serious about those words, then we're just trying to cram those big ideas and feelings into small boxes. We're learning that it's not kind to put other people into boxes, to categorize them in ways that ignore or even erase parts of who they are. So why would we want to put wonder and imagination and reverence into little boxes? There aren't many hymns about God in Singing the Living Tradition because most UUs don't agree on what that means, or else we adopt strong agnosticism, not just that we don't know, but that it's not even possible to know. One notable exception is contemporary hymn writer Brian Wren's Bring Many Names. Wren explains that we receive glimpses of divinity through our experiences of one another, in all the variations of our embodiment. Although his verses offer such glimpses, while also subverting some gender stereotypes, the hymn concludes by recognizing that nobody can ever fully know the divine. Let's sing Bring Many Names. Strong mother, warm father, aching elder, growing youth, joyful darkness far beyond our seeing, closer yet than breathing. If we're going to break open all of the small theological boxes so that we can play with our big ideas and feelings, perhaps it would help if we knew why we take religion so seriously. Well, I have a theory. And since I'm a Unitarian Universalist, I'm going to start by blaming John Calvin. Actually, I'm going to blame our own religious ancestors on the Unitarian side, namely the Puritans, but they were Calvinists, so it comes to much the same thing. And what I'm blaming them for is for something that our whole American society ended up inheriting from them, namely the Protestant work ethic, though it should more correctly be called the Calvinist work ethic. The reason for that correction is this. Calvinism teaches that some people are predestined for heaven, while everyone else is predestined for hell. Never mind trying to be a good person, never mind living an honest, fair, charitable life. God, according to John Calvin, has already decided who'll go to heaven and who'll go to hell, and there's nothing anybody can do to change that. So Calvinist theology is at best demoralizing, and at worst downright frightening, which is why our Universalist ancestors pushed back against it. I guess for a lot of people in the 16th and 17th centuries, though, there was some appeal to Calvinism for the same reason that so many people find conspiracy theories appealing today. Namely, there's comfort in believing that someone somewhere is secretly in control of what's going on. In any case, people being people, even the Calvinists weren't willing to allow God to be that inscrutable. So they developed the idea that maybe it was possible to tell which people were predestined for heaven, because having been already chosen by God, those people would then be living more upright, diligent, frugal lives. And even though, remember, Calvin taught that God had already decided and there was nothing anybody could do to change that decision, it was inevitable that people would twist that logic around and come to the conclusion that working hard and taking everything seriously might mean they were going to heaven anyway. Hence the Calvinist work ethic, where hard work and discipline and thriftiness are so emphasized because they are signs of being predestined for heaven. Oh, and it gets even more perniciously exploitative than that, because if you give someone no choice but to work hard and be frugal, maybe you're doing that according to God's plan too. And so we end up in a situation where big corporations can pretend they're doing us all a favor by offering so-called starter jobs at wages that aren't actually enough to live on. It's no wonder that play gets dismissed as the pointless activity of children, when sober-minded adults have more important things to do just to be able to live. Though I saw something recently about how psychologist Abraham Maslow got his hierarchy of needs upside down. Apparently, Maslow spent some time with the Blackfoot people, one of the First Nations in Canada, and he appropriated some of their cultural ideas, but then he forced them into a framework based on individualism and the Calvinist work ethic. So in the way that Maslow's hierarchy is usually shown as a pyramid, play would be near the top, as a luxury in which we can only indulge when all of our other needs further down have been satisfied. And yet what Maslow failed to learn from the Blackfoot people is that what we've been told are luxuries that only a privileged few can enjoy are actually essential to human well-being. So can we learn again to play? Not to be frivolous, but to engage in an open-minded, wondering, expressive, spirit-filled playfulness? And what would that look like? Debbie Thomas, the Episcopalian minister who cried when she read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and first entertained the idea that God could play, thinks it looks like deep attentiveness, a willingness to gaze, attend to detail, and enjoy rather than use, abuse, or consume. It looks like collaboration and fairness, a mutual commitment to the pleasure of all involved in the game. And it involves a steadfast and creative refusal to default to boredom, cynicism, ennui, and contempt. It's not surprising that when we apply this to religious education, we end up with programs like Spirit Play. After all, we UUs talk about the importance of free inquiry and thinking for ourselves. Indeed, many of the people who come through our membership orientation have stories of being thrown out of their childhood churches for asking too many questions. We won't do that, we say. To question is the answer. And yet the standard 1950s model of Sunday school is basically the same as regular school, with the teacher having all of the knowledge and all of the children like empty vessels waiting to be filled. And so spirit play is RE that isn't so much religious education as religious exploration. As Joanne told us, it engages children's own questions, their own wonder, their own creativity, with an adult who isn't there to provide all of the answers, but to question and wonder and create right alongside the children. I don't see why it should only be young children who get to play with religion, with spirit, with divinity. This month, I'm auditing a class at Hartford Seminary where I started my preparation for the ministry 2 decades ago. But now that I'm not worried about grades or transcripts or the ministerial fellowship committee, I am having so much more fun with it. The class is called Religious Innovation, and it's about the fact that just about every church, every religious community found creative ways to adapt back at the start of the pandemic. And now we need to adapt again as the pandemic is ending. There are so many possibilities that congregations have discovered over the last 15 months that it would be a waste to pretend we didn't learn anything. Perhaps we could take this opportunity to ask, like the religious educators who created Spirit Play, how we can not only talk about our theology, but actually embody it. How we can truly live it without restrictions inherited from a religion we rebelled against more than 300 years ago. How we can share in mystery and wonder together, and how, most of all, we can have fun doing so. Our closing hymn certainly makes the point that playfulness, not to mention inverting Maslow's hierarchy, can bring a fresh perspective that makes all the difference to our well-being. Thank you, Robin and Lucy Van Tyne, for our service music today, including your playful take on this hymn. Thank you, Marcy Stutzman, for adding lyrics so that we can sing along. And thank you, Lynn Chambers, for being our AV tech today. Let's sing The Sun That Shines.